This is also where several civilians were captured and taken hostage by Hamas, including that video that we've all seen so often of that young woman on the back of a motorcycle pleading as she's being taken away by Hamas militants. And we knew that there was going to be a high number of casualties at this event, just by the sheer number of young people who attended, but also because what we heard from survivors who had escaped, some of them in really harrowing ways to get out of there, because many of them, Anderson, went to this sort of middle of nowhere place on shared buses, on shared cars, shared taxis. They didn't exactly keep their cars there. So many of them fled essentially on foot.
If you just picture that, it doesn't need to be a concert. It doesn't need to be a concert for peace. It could just be simply a soccer game. Oh, on that topic. I happen to be speaking to you from a hotel room today in the Seattle area. I'm giving a speech tomorrow night, an event called God Wins. And just up the street from me, in Kirkland, Washington, I was going to stay in Kirkland. And I saw that the hotel I like to stay at had insane rates, and so I said no. I was going to be staying across from this park, because it's in that park that I like to do running exercises and workouts, run along the waterfront. There's a restaurant just down the street from there, one of my favorite restaurants. I do eat in the restaurant a time or two when I'm out. There were fistfights in that park between supporters of Israel and supporters of Hamas. I didn't say supporters of the Palestinians. It is a bizarre thing to understand, and yet it is a true thing, that in cities like Seattle, there are in fact supporters of Hamas. There are in fact people who want Jewish people wiped out. They do in fact train their kids here, not all of them, but many of them train their kids to look at police officers in Kirkland, Washington as an occupying force, to be hated. And it is the parents will say, this is a Hamas tactic. They exist over here. I was reading this morning The Four Loves by C.S. Lewis. And he's describing different forms of love, working up into a love relationship between us and God. He talked about love of one's country. He says, we all know now that this love becomes a demon when it becomes a God. Anything that becomes a small g God and gets between us and the Lord can become a demon. Let us not allow the demon of hatred into our hearts, even as we hope for earthly justice, even as we hope for the innocent to be protected, as Israel goes about dismantling a terrorist group, utterly dismantling, utterly destroying it. God does provide us moments where there's a time for war. And how do we do that in a godly way? You have to hear what Mike Pence said. It's pretty shameless. I'm curious what you think. I'll continue to pray that you, like me, don't give in to hatred as we talk about this. This is the Disciples View. I'm Todd.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson. Inflation and high interest rates are making it harder for Americans to navigate the current economy and still be able to pay their bills. At a time when the administration keeps promoting the benefits of Bidenomics, most Americans aren't having a positive experience. Here are some economic facts and figures that illustrate why Americans are facing difficult economic decisions. These are available on the internet, but I've provided a link to an article by Jim Garrity, who provides most of these economic statistics. The chief economist at Moody's Analytics says that buying a home or car right now is completely unaffordable for the typical American household because you're mixing the higher borrowing cost with the higher prices. He estimates that the typical American household would need to use 42 weeks of income to buy a new car. The National Association of Realtors calculates that the typical American family can't afford to buy a median-priced home. The latest economic research discovered that Americans are applying for mortgages at the lowest rate in 28 years. Similar economic calculations found that it now costs $734 more each month to buy the same goods and services as 2 years ago for households who earn the median income. Paying an additional $734 more each month adds up to $8,800 more per year for the same purchases. How many Americans have an additional $9,000 lying around? Perhaps that is why the Federal Reserve reports that household debt and credit card debt are continuing to climb even higher. Although politicians may try to tell you the economy is doing well, your personal experience and these numbers suggest otherwise. Numbers don't lie, even if politicians do. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Inflation, go to viewpoints.info/inflation. That's viewpoints.info/inflation. Skepticism of God's Word seems rampant today, but Dr. Richard Howe says it's nothing new.
I was in college and was encountering skepticism and stuff about the Bible. So that, to me, indicated that, at least in my experience, there was this dearth of grounding people in why we believe what we believe as Christians.
In the curriculum Intro to God's Revelation, Dr. Howe works to overturn the void of understanding the Bible and sharing God's Word.
We're looking at how God reveals himself, general revelation, special revelation, what that means, and then the issues of the inspiration of the Bible, its inerrancy, why are certain books in the Bible or not. Then we'll look at how did the Bible come down to us through its transmission through history, and also the issue of translation. And then we'll last look at the concepts of how do we interpret the Bible in order to apply it to ourselves.
The DVD and workbooks for Intro to God's Revelation are available today at resources.afa.net. resources.afa.net.
Today that's to my shame, when I began to learn about the terrorist attacks in Israel, that I began prepping a radio show and a podcast. And I do feel shame for that. I feel great shame for that. I had the emotions. You probably did too. And now, the next thing I began thinking about, and perhaps this is even more selfish, I began to think about Eagle Pass, Texas. Now, I know that's worlds apart, but maybe it's some of the footage I saw of people leaving this rave or trying to leave this rave, this dance party where 260 young people were murdered. And incidentally, the effort that takes. Apparently, what happened was the Hamas, if you're on CNN, were to call them militants. If you're on MSNBC, you're to call them soldiers. They're terrorists. How do I know? Because they targeted civilians for political change, the literal definition of terrorism. They flew in on hang gliders. And that means they targeted the concert. They knew exactly where they were going and why. They knew what they were going to do. Maybe it was that. Maybe it was the landscape I saw. It reminded me of some of the footage I've seen of Eagle Pass, Texas. But it was also seeing the Jeeps drive into Israel and drive into the cities and the towns and go about their business of murdering families. Maybe it was the Jeeps. It was the image of people crossing a border unfettered. The danger that this country is leaving itself open to is unspeakably profound. When we've had, under the installation of the figurehead Biden in office, up to 8 million people come into this country, and the majority of them will never know who they are. Will never know. They dump their IDs, many of them, before they come across the border because they don't want to be identified. We know we found people from terrorist supporting nations. We know we found people on the terrorist watch list. We know we found Chinese nationals. Are they connected to the Chinese Communist Party? I don't know. Is it xenophobia? No. Goodness, no. One of the things I was hoping to do while I'm over here in Seattle is to go into the city proper, so I can go experience the neighborhoods with different ethnic flavors and smells and languages. It's not as pronounced as it is in New York, but it's a little mini version of it. No, it's security. So someone would say, well, how would you prove that this isn't just a wild, paranoid suspicion you have? that Hamas and Hezbollah and the Taliban and the Chinese Communist Party in cooperation with them and perhaps Russia, how would you go about proving that they're doing this on our border? Bringing in operatives, bringing in cells, bringing in operators. My question would be this, or my statement. In order to believe that's not happening, in order to believe that they are not bringing terrorist operatives and cells across our border, you have to believe the following. Ready? You have to believe Hamas would never do that. Why? Well, it's against the rules. You would have to believe that Hezbollah would never sneak their operatives over our former border. We don't have a border, but over the line where a border used to be. And sneak isn't even really the right word. The figurehead Biden's people allow illegal immigrants to fly into the country using an app. You'd have to believe that Putin, if we want to believe that Putin wants this war with the United States, you'd have to believe that Putin, being presented the opportunity, hey, Vlad, let's just fly him in. Let's just sneak him across the border. You'd have to say, no, that's wrong. Make sure they're documented. Well, we can't break America's laws. It is an unbelievable fantasy to think that Hezbollah and Hamas and the Taliban haven't already done this. Okay, so then why aren't they attacking us? Great question. We're a far larger nation with a lot more landmass. They're not going to go limit themselves to something like this with Israel, which is a lot. It's not just about, hey, look what we did. It's about, hey, look what we did and you can join. The Taliban is asking for permission to cross land masses, to get in, to bring some equipment they've come across. They came across it, of course, when figurehead Biden's people and politicized generals left it there for them. You have the rockets coming in, as I said, from Lebanon. Part of this is Iran saying to the rest of the Islamic world, hey, look, we have them on the ropes. Hey, look, you can join in. So would it be an attack on the United States from cells that came across our former border? It would be, look, we took out electrical substations. Look, we took out train tracks. Look, we took out politicians. Look, you can too. And it would be the long game. Wall Street Journal reports that Iran planned this. That is something many of us already assumed, of course, because Iran funds Hamas. Certainly they funded it, but apparently they planned it. So what did they do? How many people do we need? How much ammo? How many weapons? What are the soft targets we can take out to make an impact? What do they ultimately want from the United States? I think they want ground troops. I think they want United States ground troops back in that region so that we can get into another quagmire. Instead of taking out the head of the snake, I think they want to test drone attacks against our troops and against our ships. I think they've observed the war in Russia and said that, hey, there's other ways, or war in Ukraine and Russia, there's other ways, asymmetrical warfare ways to attack. I think they want this. I'm not a military strategist. I'm a pattern recognition guy. They chose this time for this reason. And into that, we bring Mike Pence. So Mike Pence...
I believe this is what happens when we have leading voices like Donald Trump, Vivek Ramaswamy, and Ron DeSantis signaling retreat from America's role as leader of the free world. What happened in Ukraine was an unprovoked invasion by Russia. What happened this weekend was an unprovoked invasion by Hamas into Israel. And I really believe now more than ever, both the debate within the Republican Party and the debate within America is whether or not we're going to once again stand without apology as the leader of the free world, as the arsenal of democracy. The heartbreaking images coming out of both of these theaters of operations remind us that America is the indispensable leader of the free world. And if I'm president of the United States, we'll lead from American strength.
So let us go through the statements from Mike Pence, which is perhaps the most desperate and stupid statement about these attacks that man could possibly utter. He'd have to try really hard. So we have President Trump, who in fact wiped out ISIS because he got the lawyers out of the way. The president said, we're not going to have lawyers run this operation. We're going to have warriors run this operation. I don't particularly care, said the president, what Iraq thinks or what other countries think. We are wiping out ISIS, who intends to wipe out us. It's impolite, and it worked. So as he did that, then he moved on the Abraham Accords, which in fact did bring stability, which in fact did bring Saudi Arabia to the precipice of normalizing relationships with Israel. And some have said this is what Iran wants to fight. They don't want that normalized relationship. Of course they don't. And it didn't happen under President Trump because President Trump showed, hey, look what I'll do to ISIS. President Trump is not our savior. We only have one. His name is Jesus Christ. And he will win the ultimate war. In fact, he's won it. Already has. President Trump is a flawed man. We all are. But he was unpredictable. The people who run Joe Biden are predictable. They back Iran. Tacitly, if not openly. Financially. That's been the pattern. Why? So Mike Pence is blaming a president under whom this did not occur, pretending that President Trump stepped back from the world stage or the involvement in the world, when in fact he went to the world bodies and said, hey, we're done paying your bills. Hey, NATO, other countries need to step up. It's not going to just be us. Russia didn't go into Ukraine under President Trump. They waited until we had the figurehead. And Mike Pence rolls the governor of Florida into this? The governor who actually is a veteran? I understand he's a decorated veteran. You're rolling him into this? At the same time as you have a decrepit and corrupt figurehead at the center of all of this. And you have a pattern. And the pattern is the people who back Barack Obama back Iran. Iran backs Hamas. President Obama told us in his book, I should have pulled the audio copy of this. President Obama told us, if the political winds shift in an ugly direction, he will stand with the Muslims. Now, this is true conspiracy, true, except it's not. It's suspicion. It's odd. It's weird. It's always been weird. I was once on, believe it or not, remember Keith Olbermann back before he did a show from a basement? He was on MSNBC, and he had a show, he had a feature in a show called Worst Person in the World. And that person one day, I was nominated to be the worst person in the world. And I lost to a shark. He decided a shark was worse than I am. I was nominated because I simply put up a tweet that referenced Barack Obama in a very, very strange interview with George Stephanopoulos, where Barack Obama said, give John McCain credit. He's never questioned my Muslim faith. And George Stephanopoulos said, your Christian faith. And Barack Obama said, my what? He said, you're a Christian. You said Muslim. Oh, yeah, I forgot. I'm a Christian. He didn't say I forgot, but he said, oh, yeah, Christian. That's weird. I have never once misstated my faith. Now, maybe he meant that John McCain had never questioned whether he was a Christian or a Muslim, but that isn't what he said. And in his book, he said he would stand with Muslims if the political winds blew in an ugly direction, and he has stood with Iran. He has funded them time and again, illegally. Under his tenure, illegally, with pallets of cash in foreign denominations, and we're not to ask questions about this? And the pattern continues under the figurehead. And we're not to ask questions about this. When the boss of Iran, some people call him the president of Iran, I don't play that game. When the boss of Iran got the latest $6 billion, Lester Holt, and God bless you, Lester, for asking this question. Lester Holt is an anchor at NBC, MSNBC. I met him once. I'm not name dropping. I don't consider Lester Holt important. I don't consider him important or more important than anyone else. I'm describing a circumstance. I met Lester. I found him to be a curious man, meaning he asked interesting questions, meaning he was interested in what we at Microsoft were doing. He went beyond just a surface level. I found him to be very, very kind. I found him to be very down to earth, just a normal guy. That speaks to his credit. I also found him to love journalism, and somewhere in his heart, somewhere inside Lester Holt, there's still a journalist. And he asked the so-called president of Iran, the boss of Iran, he said, they tell us this $6 billion can only be used for humanitarian aid. He's September 12th interviewing him. What are you going to use it for? And he said, it's our money. We'll use it for whatever we want to use it for. A humanitarian means whatever we decide it means. Whatever the needs of the Iranian people are, we'll decide what their needs are. The government. They've already decided.